All right, welcome. This is a hard episode. Aren't they all? But this one, well, it hurt to write. It hurts to record this right now. And I imagine it will hurt to post. Hell, you will very likely not even believe what I'm saying. You might think I'm overreacting, particularly if you come from my community of origin. You'll see the image of my birth mother that you know and remember, and you'll never think she could behave like this, like she does in these stories that I will tell. It was brutal, it was real, and you don't have to believe me. This story isn't for you. It's for me to break free, to free myself, and maybe, just maybe, help free others too. So, today's topic is on enmeshment. Enmeshment is hard to recognize, and certainly was for me. I'm going to tell a portion of my own story that I hope will shed light for you on my journey, and perhaps enlighten you to what may be occurring in your own lives. For a refresher, enmeshment is complex. It's complex to see, to understand, and to define. But in short, enmeshment in a family or relationship context refers to a situation where individuals are overly involved in each other's lives, leading to blurred boundaries, emotional dependency, and difficulty in maintaining individual autonomy. So the first part of this two-part episode will be about how I finally came to terms with the fact that I was indeed being emotionally abused. In particular, in my relationship with my birth mother, though she did not act in a vacuum and was not the only abuser. Enmeshed families work as systems. And without blame or shame, the pain came from the person who I called my mother. And while she may have not done this intentionally, hell, it likely came from her own fears, pains, and traumas. It was certainly experienced as emotional abuse from the woman who birthed me. Ooh, these stories may seem slight, subtle, heck, even trivial to some. Worse, some of you may side with the abuser. You might think I'm lying, leaving out the details, over-exaggerating, heck, maybe even being too sensitive. This is to be expected, as most not only do not notice this behavior, but will have trouble accepting that my reality and the reality of my experience is closer to the truth. As to do so would be to come to terms with a few potentially harsh realities. The first being that maybe, one, you might be being abused by your own parents and family. Or two, you may be enabling the abuse of other family members. Or three, you yourself are abusing other family members. Emotional abuse is hard to name, to see, and certainly to break free of. It's rampant and does not discriminate by race, gender, or social status. Its scars are not black and blues or broken bones, but they can impact for life. This can look like, but is not limited to, people suffering from chronic indecision, self-doubt, self-hate, self-blame, guilt, and particularly feelings of not doing enough or being there enough for their families of origin, and particularly for the abuser. There's also a myriad of mental health conditions associated and correlated with this kind of trauma, including but not limited to substance abuse, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, suicide, anorexia, and go down the list in the DSM. Much of those can be connected to someone who comes from enmeshed and emotionally abusive backgrounds. At its core, an emotionally abused person, much like a physically abused person, often believes, not in all cases, but can believe it's their fault for receiving the abuse. Somebody cue Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting. As part of this, the abused often side with the abuser. I've described Stockholm Syndrome in this case. Daniel Mackler has an amazing video on it, and his great book, Breaking Free from Your Parents, that's right behind me there. Anyway, this can be for a variety of reasons, but typically this is to maintain safety and stability for the person being abused. Because for the abused to admit that they have been abused is to acknowledge that the people they thought care for them the most do not actually care for them, or not in the way that they actually meets their needs and desires. That means that they are potentially somewhat alone in this world, at least in this moment. And to come to terms with that reality is harsh. See, society has deeply ingrained families as necessities to living, which places an undue amount of power in the hands of those playing family roles. We are programmed and positioned to be extremely reliant and attached to these people. From birth, this can have positive outcomes, certainly. Family can be great, but this kind of dynamic can place family members in problematic power positions. That is, that mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, and anyone else can abuse these birth-given titles in an attempt to control the behavior of the abused. You would never leave your mother. You would never abandon your brother. You would never say that to your father. These kind of lines allow those people with those titles to get away with horrific boundary violations. The abused often tolerate much more in these kind of relationships than they would in any other dynamic in their lives. These power dynamics, coupled with a social group that is deeply emotionally insensitive to the unique needs of individuals, see my video on the Syrian community for that, can be brutal. It's a brutal combination. A person is not a person, or not treated that way. They are a family representative, and if they do not represent well, they are failing and will be punished and put in line. Now, much of this is unconscious and fear and control based, but not all of it. And the worst part, these punishers are not just their parents, grandparents, cousins, friends, siblings. They are internalized. After years of hearing these messages, the abused person will abuse themselves, telling themselves, how dare I do XYZ? How dare I choose myself? I must be a selfish, narcissistic monster. With each post I post, some of those voices creep up on me. Certainly with a video like this. Daniel Mackler speaks about it in his Stockholm Syndrome video and in more of his videos. And this is also in line with internal family systems theory, that we internalize the voices of our abusers until they become our own and towards ourselves. You could see Richard Schwartz's work for that. It's incredible. In the book, No Bad Parts. Breaking free can be a brutal process, and many do not live to tell the tale. Others will suffer a lifetime before making a change, and continue to suffer even after leaving the initial problematic dynamic. This is how they learn to relate with themselves and others. They don't have any models for healthy living and relating. That is hopefully where therapy can come in, to show the client what a healthy relationship can look like and feel like. However, there are many therapists who continue the problematic dynamics unconsciously and enable and even re-traumatize their clients. Dr. Andrew Tatarsky called that treatment trauma. I hope this video can help others begin to curiously question abusers they may be tolerating right now, and perhaps take steps towards breaking free. Whew. All right. So before I start my story about how I found out I was being emotionally abused, I'd like to thank a couple people. There are many to thank, but first, Jeanette McCurdy for having the courage to tell her story in her book, I'm Glad My Mother Died. When my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer this past December, that book and Jeanette's public interviews were vital for me, just to give myself permission to exist. That diagnosis certainly has changed challenged my life and my life choices, and in particular, the choice to make a video like this. But physical sickness does not excuse emotionally abusive behavior, nor erase a past full of emotional abuse. I'd also like to thank Daniel Mackler for writing his book that's right behind me, Breaking from Your Parents. I have it over here. It's been a guide and a voice of validation for me and my experience. All right, so here we go. It's hard to find a place to begin. These will not cover all the traumas, nor all the freedoms. Like singing Kelly Clarkson's Breakaway, the time I chose to go to a different shul than the one my parents had seats in but didn't go to. Heck, these are just some of the icebergs. It's not meant as a vendetta against my community of origin, or my family of origin, or my birth mother. But I hope it sheds light on what it was like for me. How I found out I was being emotionally abused, and how I began to break free. Okay. It starts at birth and my entire upbringing. I was a burden right off the bat for my parents. Medical issues and whatnot. A faulty heart valve was the main event, but there were other things. It was always something, they would tell me. And my mom got to play hero. She was my everything. Fast forward to high school. My parents vacillated between emotional neglect and aggressively trying to control me in terms of my behavior, at least. Particularly when responding to my substance use and abuse. Often, they responded with attempts of more control, which was, upon reflection, counterintuitive, given my use was mostly based in trying to find freedom and autonomy in my life. But at the time, I thought it was what I deserved. When my dad said, "If we catch you smoking weed, you aren't going away to college," I thought it was more of something to get around, not a sign that he was being insensitive to my needs. Weed was bad, right? I was effing around. I was a degenerate, right? And so when they continued to try to control my use with punishments and threats, I thought I was an F-up alcoholic. I deserved this. What did I expect? To clarify, their approach to my substance use was highly problematic and enabled more problematic use, but this can be further explained in another episode. In college, I finally got away. This was a full 4 hours drive from home. I was in Boston, which was more than most of my friends could say, who, as most of them did, stay back in Brooklyn. Still, I was feeling tons of guilt feelings about not being home with my family, and called my parents often and came home every 3 weeks. I even flew home in the middle of my study abroad semester in Florence. But I still didn't see this as a them problem. I thought of it as a me problem. This was about my guilt, and they had nothing to do with that. The first hint of any problematic dynamic with my parents came actually when things in my life were getting better. After some life-changing moments abroad, I decided to start doing things that actually made me feel good. Not just during, but after too. No more chasing short-term highs, I told myself. I was hiking, volunteering in a hospital, connecting to God, starting to do well in my classes. I put down the bottle. I started being safer with my cannabis and alcohol use, using much less frequently, and I turned around my GPA after a rough first 2 years of college. And I had a dream that was to help people. I wanted to study psychology, hell, maybe even become a therapist. But I doubted myself. I worried my motivations were impure. Was I trying to heal myself? Did I really want this? Was I just escaping my obligations? And so I went to the therapy that my college offered. They had 10 free sessions. And so, I thought I'd take them up on it. And after 3 sessions, just 3 sessions, the therapist handed me this gem. It sounds like you really want to do this. It also sounds like this doubt may not be your own. And the seed was planted. See, my mom didn't want me going into psychology. It's so heavy, she would say. For my dad, that was a hard pitch as well. I told him I would consider going into organizational behavioral psychology or business psych. Think the lady from Billions. Remember, as part of the communal expectations, there were these expectations to make a lot of money. And while psychology made some money, clearly it wasn't enough. So I had to do something really creative to prove it to them that I was actually serious about this. And so ultimately, I did choose to go to NYU for a master's in psychology. And I left that therapist after that 3rd session thinking I solved the issue that I came in for, which was the indecision around the application process. So while in NYU, I dated a woman. For me, our time together was never boring. And I really felt like she saw me for who I was. My parents, not so much. If we find out she was in your apartment, you are losing the apartment. Being financially reliant on my parents, this threat was problematic for me. And if it sounds familiar, it was very familiar to the, if we find out you're smoking weed. And still, I was becoming religious at the time. I had enough reasons to move away from the dynamic myself, and so I did. Then the Gaber moment happened. I discussed in my last video about him yelling at me in front of an audience of 500 people and showing me the potential impacts of the emotional trauma I experienced from my father's bouts of anger and yelling. But my dad didn't yell as much since becoming a grandfather 2 years before that talk. So yeah, he was getting better. It was okay now. I was going to be okay. I just needed to work out my fears of authority. And that was, again, a me thing. He was healed already. I'm the one who needed more healing. But then I started dating a new woman. She was not like the other one. She was a straight A student, good family, religious, and still the same. Morris, you are not allowed to date her. I was a year older, a year into my master's program, and already applying for a doctorate in clinical psychology. And this. What? Their reasoning? From my mom. I was walking on the boardwalk on Shabbat and saw her mother. I had my headphones in. I was mortified. We are not having a girl in skirts in our house. Okay, so to understand this dynamic, you need a lot of background. In short, my family did not practice the strict code of Jewish law. They had strict laws, don't worry, but just not the Orthodox Jewish ones. It was more conservative, traditional Jewish, but don't tell my mom that, she'll have my head. So by girl in skirts, they meant that she was more practicing religious. Having a skirt below the knees was part of religious garb for women. And her family, the girl's family as well, was more practicing. And so they saw my dating of her, which was for only like 3 days at this point, as a threat to their stability in the home. God forbid if they had to accommodate for my needs if I became religious, like keeping kosher or not playing music on the Sabbath. You know, the things they taught me in the school they forced me to go to, right? And I saw right through the hypocrisy. I was fuming. I wasn't doing drugs. I was choosing a partner, a healthy one at that. And so I snuck around for around their mandate for a couple days, but this dynamic didn't last. The new partner wasn't that interested, and the parties were calling me, and so that was that. It's a long and miraculous story, but I got into a doctorate program. My life was healthier, but not perfect. I met a girl during my break in Miami. 2 weeks later, I was on my way to see her in Philly. She wasn't exactly the kind of girl they were looking for, but this wasn't supposed to be forever. It was one night. And on my way there was a life-changing moment. Yeah, a major car accident. Trauma trigger warning to anyone squeamish of car accidents. A lady short-stopped. 3 cars tried their best to stop behind her. I was the 4th. We were going at highway speeds. I couldn't stop in time. I turned away with enough milliseconds to save my own life. My car did crash into the back of a pickup truck. And then I got hit again. And then finally hit the guardrail on the opposite side of the highway. And came to a stop. Wow. Somehow, after all this, there was only a tiny scratch on my arm. And so I called my brother to ask what to do in the situation. I was still pretty intent on making it to Philly that night, being I was only 20 minutes away. I was physically okay. The car was clearly totaled. What could I do? But he panicked, called my parents without telling me, and suddenly they're on the line, screaming, "Uncle is coming to pick you up right now!" Imagine, I'm still shaking from the trauma of the accident. And I knew not to call them for this reason, because I had a feeling they would react like this, especially given my choice in the moment, which was still intent on making it to Philly. And here I am having to get yelled at by my parents. I wasn't on drugs. I was on my way to something they might not be proud of. And you can argue, after the accident, I could have gone back home. But going to meet this girl was not a crime by any standard. And perhaps it's telling. I felt safer spending the night with a girl I barely knew than with my own family. When I came home, my parents let me know they had spoken to a psychiatrist and felt that they should be putting me on medication. There's more background here, but I was a 24-year-old doctorate student. I had a master's in psychology and was already in therapy at the time with a therapist I was finally learning to trust. And here were my parents trying to force me into psychiatric care without even consulting me in their decision process until after they found a doctor that apparently had already, before meeting me, diagnosed me as needing medication. And so I said no and moved forward. Fast forward, I'm 3 years into my doctorate program. Things are going relatively well. It wasn't a cakewalk, I'll say that. I was more religious at this point. No more drives to Philly. And so much for them not wanting a girl in skirts, I kept becoming more religious. It was giving me meaning and purpose in life. It really was. Argue what you want, if it was the truth or if I was filling holes. It was safer and more fulfilling than any bottle of vodka ever was. And so on my way to ultra-orthodoxy, there had been wars in my house over kashrut, that is the laws of Jewish kosher standards around food. It was intense. It was part of the reason I ultimately moved out of the house that I had lived home for 2 years following the start of the pandemic. And now I was finally moving out. All the way down the block into a house my brother was doing construction on. It was nice. Despite not living home, there was still this expected attendance at weekly family barbecues on Monday nights. On top of that, of course, the Sabbath dinner on Friday nights. Each Monday night, my mom would make a comment, ever so subtle. "This is kosher! I don't understand! Why can't you come home more often? What do they have that we don't?" Oof. These were some of the more obvious and overt ones, but I can't describe fully just how awful it felt to receive these subtle and not so subtle jabs and criticisms and doubts from my mother on a weekly basis. I'd leave those dinners with my chest and heart area feeling a stabbing pain, and this was not acid reflux. It would last for days, and I had to practice as a therapist, treating patients with a heart that was aching awfully. This was particularly difficult on the Tuesday following the Monday night barbecues where work was really challenging. These pains would usually be resolved through therapy, in the freezing oceans, or in a hot sauna. I'd sing this song, "Someday soon, these worries won't haunt." Writing poetry helped too. I wrote about 700 poems in a 3-year span. Whew. These battles around my decision to becoming religious were intense. I finally had a reason to set boundaries with my family, and particularly my mother. See, in the 10 Commandments, the Sabbath comes before respect of parents. And there was no way I was breaking the Sabbath to appease my mother. And all these arguments came to a head around an interesting and unique night with two completely unrelated events coinciding. There was a wedding and a conversion. I was asked by a friend to drive him to his conversion interview. That's an interview process by a panel of rabbis before approving someone to become a member of the ultra-Orthodox Jewish tribe. I was honored to be part of such an intimate moment in his life. This was going to take 3 to 6 hours at least of back and forth. I was going to be going from Brooklyn, taking it from Queens to the Bronx. That night there was a wedding in Manhattan, a big wedding in the SY world. A jet set was getting married. It was one of my parents' close friends' kids. It wasn't exactly my bestie. And so for me, the decision was easy. Yes, I understood that this wedding and weddings in the SY world were not just weddings, but dating events. And this was the wedding of the year. But I wasn't interested in being a part of that world anymore. Beyond that, I had a chance to do something special for a good friend of mine, someone I cared about, and I felt cared about me. I didn't even feel safe telling my parents what it was I was doing, given the strong SY ban on conversion. I didn't think they'd be big fans of this excuse. I told them it was something really important for a friend of mine, and that wasn't enough. My mom was furious. I was deeply hurt. I was tired of this battle. I drove to my yeshiva in Far Rockaway. At that point, I had only been going on Sundays. Not even every Sunday. But I was ready to move in that night. I was sitting in my car, stressed out, frozen, in the parking lot, wondering what to do. I didn't want to go back home. My sister called. My father called. This is classic enmeshment scene, by the way. See, I'm the problem. Please, Morris. She is so hurt you're not there. Just do this. Do it for us. LOL. Like doing this will make her actually accept me for me. I was torn, and this is classic symptoms of enmeshment. The abused is put between a rock and a hard place. Choosing yourself is positioned diametrically opposed to being a good son. You are forced to choose one. Choose you? Selfish bastard, destroying the family! Choose your family, and your insides feel abandoned. You left yourself. Cue the psychosomatic symptoms, the gut pain, the shoulder, neck, and heart, to name a few. Of course, no one confronted my mother about her problematic, controlling, and overreacting behaviors. They wouldn't dare. And so I was not brave enough, nor self-sustaining enough financially. See, I had 2.5 years at that point left in my doctorate program that they were paying for. I had no source of income. My rent, car, food, you name it, I was completely reliant on them and not ready to disconnect financially. Beyond that, emotionally too. And I bought into their narrative that I was overreacting. And then came my superhero thought. I could do it. I'll do both. I'll save the day. And so I drove my friend from Queens to the Bronx, stuck around for his interview, drove him back from the Bronx to Queens, all the traffic. And as I was dropping him off, he got the call. They accepted him. We hugged. We celebrated. And I couldn't even stay for the celebrations with the guys. I had to drive off to this wedding in Manhattan. And I made it just after the ceremony as they were walking out of the room. Pretty good timing. And that was all on my Sunday off. Did I say I was also balancing a transition to ultra-orthodoxy, dating in that world, doing my own therapy work, doing my work as a therapist, and had my obligations to the doctorate program? Right. I felt like a shell of myself at that wedding. I still have a picture of me reuniting with my parents over there. We're smiling. I can see the pain in my face. I'm not very proud of that photo. And oh yeah, it was my birthday that night at midnight. I was turning 27. And the wedding was right near my favorite spot in Central Park. I called it my very own Mount Joy. And so I walked over there just before midnight, sat on the mountain, looked up at the full moon and wondered, when was this ever going to get better? What did God have planned for me? That summer, I did choose to move into the ultra-Orthodox community. Beyond supporting me in my transition, the religious institution also provided subsidized rent and was also going to be providing food. It was a huge step in moving past the place where I came from. I also had the privilege of informing my parents of my decision to move. I was nervous to do it over the phone, so I drove. I was in Brooklyn at the time, and they were in Jersey already for the summer, and so I drove all the way to Jersey to tell them my plans to move for the summer to Far Rockaway. You came here all the way to tell us this? Far F away, they called it. Because, of course, choosing me meant abandoning them. There's a lot of funny parallels between transitioning to ultra-orthodoxy and transitioning in gender expression. That is both, at some point, become really hard to hide from your family. My grandfather, my father's father, participated in some sick silent treatments and often accused me of being a selfish prick, abandoning the family. He had his own gripes with the religion, having his own struggles with his father over it, and had seemingly replaced the strict Judaism that was once in his life with strict family values and imposed those on all of us. I.e., these were rules that said the family was more important than the individual. And so there was one brave day by that grandfather and grandmother's house on my father's side. They had this Saturday pool hangout in the summertime. This was not just a hangout, it was a staple, happening years before I was even born. With my dad and his cousins, we'd hang out, sometimes play sports, eat delicious lunch, jump in the pool. It was nice. I miss it sometimes. But yeah, if someone was dating someone, bringing them to grandma's pool on Saturday was like a nervous debut, in a kind of way. And for me, I wasn't bringing a date to grandma, but I was bringing my Shabbos suit. See, this pool hangout was on Saturdays, and I was becoming religious. At this point, it had felt fake for me to wear a short bathing suit on the Sabbath. Sure, I'd stand out like a sore thumb in a full suit and pants and a button-down on a sunny summer day with people around in their bathing suits, but I decided it was more important to be integral than to fit in. I was also going to be walking in this suit, walking from my house to theirs, as I no longer got on a bicycle or car on the Sabbath to my religious observance. I did my best to find shady spots on the sidewalk during my walk. It was at least an hour's walk from my house, and the synagogue I was attending at the time was about halfway through. But it was still 40 minutes from that synagogue, with summer heat, multiple layers of clothing, and all the nerves, whether or not they'd accept me in my Shabbos suit by the pool. Halfway there, my mom had randomly passed by on her bicycle. She short-stopped. "Is that you? You have a change of clothes, right?" No, Mom, this is what I'm wearing." "Morris, turn around right now! You're not doing this! We're not doing this!" Oh boy. All the ouchies. I walked forward anyway. On my walk, I saw another old friend, also walking in a suit he didn't used to wear. We gave each other a wink. It was nice to not feel so alone for just a moment. Towards the end of the walk, I sat under this tree outside my grandma's house. I had a mini panic attack before walking in. I took a few deep breaths, looked up to God for help, and heart pounding, I opened the gate into the backyard and looked around, and nobody seemed to care. Or at least they didn't say anything. My cousins were even joking around with me. They were really supportive, actually, or for the most part. "What? You're becoming religious? We didn't know!" It was nice to have some people in my family who were not. And my car lease is coming up. At the time, I was driving a BMW X5, relatively new. Did I say it was hard to leave my parents' financial cushion? And for me, the car didn't mean much. If anything, I was uncomfortable. I felt like I was wearing a big gold chain. When giving a ride to a fellow cohort member in my doctor program, he bluntly asked me, "What does it feel like to be this rich and in our program?" I probably wasn't even the richest, but this car didn't help the optics. I was particularly at the time battling some problematic power dynamics in my doctor program, and they were labeling me as entitled, and it's a longer story for another day, but driving a nicer car than most of my professors and supervisors at work did not help my cause. And so I wanted to get a more low-key car. I found the Toyota I liked. I was a bit nervous. I tried getting all the details and everything set up before pitching it to my dad. And I got some intense pushback. My dad was saying, "The Toyota isn't safe enough, Mo. How about the Volvo?" This was a brand new Toyota. And he was a logical man, usually focused on safety, yes, but also a frugal one. This didn't feel like him. Plus, his response was hurting my heart. And his responses don't usually hurt my heart. They hurt my neck and stress me out. They didn't particularly make me feel heartbroken or heart-stabbed. That was usually my mom's work. And I just looked at him and I said, "Dad, is this really about safety?" "All right, Mo, your mom doesn't want you driving a Toyota." in some of the back and forth over this, my mom sent me a letter that detailed how she was doing what was best for me. And no girl she would want for her son and want her son dating would want to be picked up in a Toyota. And then she went on to explain how she justified not only this, but also manipulating other family members' intimate decisions as well. It was sickening. Mother knows best. I was already living in a totally different social circle to hers. I returned home every few weeks, but didn't stick around long enough. This was my decision. This was my life. But of course I didn't have finances and had another year plus of the doctorate program to finish. And they were paying for my therapy too, which I was desperately reliant on at the time. And in all this, my therapist kept sending me home. During the pandemic, when I was with my family a lot, she trained me to wear a Teflon suit to deflect all the painful stabs. I now see her direction as problematic to some extent. She would say no other therapist would send you home, but wouldn't fully explain to me how I was falling prey to guilt, shame, and enmeshed dynamics, and how this was much more about them than me. And she was also getting paid by my mom and speaking to my mom. My mom was also speaking to my matchmaker at the time in the religious world, and she had even confided in me that she was afraid of my mother. Each time I'd come home, my mom would pressure me, telling me she had a long line of girls ready for me to date. My mom was also manipulative around my doctor's appointments. Remember that superhero mom with all the health, helping with all the health stuff? Well, at 27, I was thankfully fully healthy and mature and responsible enough to handle my own appointments. But no, she wanted and needed to be there with me. And when I refused to let her meet my new heart doctor, it was another battle. The last doctor she convinced to subtly push me to exercise more. I remember that. I mean, it was like a small tiny thing, but creepy and manipulative. And I was maybe a couple pounds overweight at worst. I succumbed at some point, and as a Mother's Day gift to her, see that guilt again, invited her to come to the doctor's appointment with me, and I was a good son again. But now, the Toyota, this was sick. This was sick, deeply sick. This may seem silly to some. Oh, look at this rich kid complaining his parents are buying him too nice of a car. This wasn't about what they were buying me. This was about manipulation, control, and disregard of my autonomy and self-worth. And I was done. And so I wrote the breakup letter. I planned on returning my car. I started looking up bus routes to get from the yeshiva to work. And I had just enough funds to pay rent at the yeshiva. They would feed me. And by that September, I'd be at Internship where I'd get a stipend, so I'd be able to survive on that. And so I wrote the breakup letter. I drove home to deliver it. And she wasn't there. My dad was. He read the letter and begged me not to give it to her. Please, please, Mo, let me at least have a say if my family gets to stay together or not. And cue all the guilt. And so I backed out for now. But I began a process of what I now know is called gray rocking. This is a helpful strategy for those trapped in emotionally abusive dynamics, particularly while they plan their exit. Basically, I was physically present around her, but would not open up and only share as much as necessary in any conversation. And so I reluctantly accepted a lease on a brand new Volvo. There's a line somewhere. Money doesn't buy happiness, but it's easier to cry in a luxury car than on a bike. It's even easier when that luxury car has a self-driving button. But yeah, none of that made the pain go away. And so Passover was coming. I spoke in Welcome to the Syrian Community on the significance of the Passover Trip. It was a status symbol. And we were on the trip to be on with all the big jet set players. And for me, I had spent the entire year dedicating myself to studying the Talmud, an ancient Aramaic Jewish law book. We happened to be studying the laws of Passover. We spent almost 2 hours a night, 4 nights a week, for the entire year, learning just the laws of Passover. Hell, we spent 3 or 4 months on just the laws of the afternoon leading up to Passover. And while this trip that we were going on with my family would be kosher, this wasn't about Passover. This was about status and power. And I wanted to finally actually celebrate the holiday, for the holiday, with people that cared about the holiday. Our family Seder famously would end the quickest, or maybe some years are close to second place, 30 minutes max. At yeshiva, they'd go hours, till about 2 in the morning, longer. Sometimes even later, stories, songs, tears, bonding with the guys I've been in the trenches with all year. Say what you want about the problematic Jewish belief systems, and it's problematic. But this event with these guys would have been so special for me, and I wanted to be there. My only problem was I had to inform my mother I wouldn't be coming on the Passover trip. The stress of trying to time this right was intense. I often blame myself for poor timing of my request. A teaching moment. There is no good time to be abused. And no, your bad timing is not why you're being abused. It's not your fault. And so I asked 2 to 3 months in advance on a Friday afternoon, home for the Sabbath, Mom, I want to spend Passover at the yeshiva. Oh, okay. Huh? A silence in the room so thick. Was it real? Did she just say yes? And then came the crash. Yeah, you don't want to come? That's fine, sure. We'll just stop paying for therapy. She was adamant I was going for too many hours. And where there is a lot to be said about my problematic dynamic with my therapist, she was not threatening to cut my hours here because she was worried about enmeshment. She was worried my therapist was helping me leave her and helping me make decisions like not coming with them on the jet set Passover trip. We fought, we argued, we yelled. I left hurt and feeling like an extremist. And my dad pushed me to settle. I would go the first half with my family on the Passover trip, and then I'd have the second half with the yeshiva. I'd miss, of course, the glorious Seder with the yeshiva guys, but at least I'd get something. And here is where I must bring up the middle ground fallacy. Settling is not always righteous, particularly in situations of emotional abuse. But as with the car and the other abuses going on, I wasn't ready to commit to leaving my family. Hell, the decision to not come on the trip was already hard enough, even if they supported it. I loved that trip. It was my favorite as a kid. I missed my cousins, and I was cherishing getting a chance to have close time with my nephews. I was already mourning a lot without their pressure. And so I did go for the first half, but I did it my way. I wore a white button-down and pants every day. I refused to go down to the beach and held court by the lunch tables. I had some great conversations and left after the first half of the holidays. It was hard to leave. I can still see the tears in my nephew's eyes, telling him I was leaving early. As hard as it was, I knew I was choosing myself, and maybe was even being a good role model, who knows. I recorded a brief voice note at the time as kids played in the background, and I enjoyed my last meal of the trip.
What a lifetime. What a song. Singing a song of freedom. Come and sing along. Singing a song of freedom. Come and sing along.
I started internship. It was going to be a doozy. I was committed to living at the yeshiva, but it was 2 hours commute one way to work, to the place I worked. The work wasn't easy either. I'd be a psychology intern at a government-run inpatient psychiatric facility. I needed to be at work 5 days a week at 8 a.m. And I had Jewish prayer services, morning, noon, night, 3 times a day. I had stopped attending group services to accommodate for this, but even without it, I was still had to commit time to actually doing the prayers on my own. That doesn't include all the hours of therapy I was still committed to. I was able to make time for that on Sundays. And how about my dissertation work? Okay, I could squeeze that in on Thursday nights. How about my nightly learning? Okay, Sunday night through Wednesday night. Whew, what about dating? In the religious world, which in itself is like a job hunt with resumes and interviews and references. Okay, I'll do that on the side, right when I get home, 40 minutes and cooking. And how about the mandatory weekly calls to my mom? And the monthly returns home. And I'm dealing with all the trauma from that. I also made a time an hour a week to surf and some time post my dissertation work to get in a sauna, hell, maybe even enjoy a Knicks game and eat some Chinese food for some simple pleasures. And while attending orientation for that internship, there was a life-changing moment where I saw this video that taught me what validation looks like. I'll talk about that in my next video, but there was another important moment here which I will talk about, and that has to do with my beard. See, 2 weeks prior to starting my job, I decided to grow a beard. I had only once gone past a month or so, and that was a controversial Rangers playoff beard. My family couldn't wait for me to shave. Here, my Jewish sect wasn't even that into beards. I mean, the rabbis had beards, but not really the students. Growing a beard was seen by some of the rabbis as trying to work on the outside before the inside. For me, I felt some sense of spirituality in it. I liked it. I couldn't explain it, but I'm like, this feels nice. I'm going to do it. I'm moving forward. And 2 weeks later, work said I was going to have to shave. What? They needed to make sure my N95 COVID mask fit well on my face and couldn't do so with a beard. Say what you will about the importance of masking. This was September 2023. 2 of the men at orientation looked at me after hearing this shaving decree and were hoping I'd stand up for myself. They wanted me to say something that it was about religious rights or something and hopefully give them some leeway too, to protect their own beards. And I thought, maybe... And then I heard my dad's voice in my head. Don't be effing around, Mo! And I said, no, I'm shaving. I'll shave. And I shaved my beard off that Friday. On Monday, I come back into work, and there was some stubble that grew in over the weekend, and guess what? Still too much. And so I had to shave again before fitting the N95 mask. It was humiliating. I promised myself never again was I shaving to appease someone else. I owned the space on my face. I was entitled to at least that. And so I grew my beard. It wasn't necessarily spiritual, more so of a beard of defiance. I was not going to allow other people to control my life. And in comes my mother. It took about a little bit over a month, but she came. Every week, a comment. Then around Hanukkah, I could hear, as I was coming to the door for our family gathering, shh, no one tell Morris we're talking about his beard, they said as someone came to open the door for me. It was disheartening to know, out of everything that was going on in my life at the time, everything I was working on, that my beard was the topic of conversation. Not about how proud they were of me getting my life together, or closing in on my doctorate, or how impressed they were about how much I was balancing and holding on my plate. No. It was about the length of my beard. This was quite ironic, even comical in some sick kind of way for me, given that part of me knew that if it wasn't religion I was choosing, that this might have not been a beard I was walking in with. I could have been coming in expressing an entirely different gender identity. It wasn't necessarily testing them, but if it was quite revealing about what it might be like if I actually did speak my truth. Of course, when that truth differed from their expectations of what I would be doing. And their expectations for me. Fast forward to January. There was a new dating possibility. But she lived in Baltimore. Would I dare date a girl so far from home? Was this the path to freedom that I needed? My rabbi wasn't that into it. She watched movies, he told me. As in she was still somewhat into the ever-dangerous American culture. You're way past that. She's not for you. I went forward anyway. I thought if it worked out, I would no longer be as reliant on the yeshiva support and I could deal with the consequences afterwards. Then one Friday night, my rabbi asked to see me after dinner. Oy. I was nervous. I thought he was going to confront me about the relationship, that he had heard about it somehow. I waited until most of the guys had left, and he sat me down on the table alone, late Friday night. My heart's pounding, wondering what he might have to say. Was I ready to get kicked out of the yeshiva over this? Morris, it's about your mother. And now I'm like, did something happen? I think we actually agree on something for once. See, I had my parents visit the yeshiva, I think a year earlier, and even sit down with the rabbi to show them that it was not a cult. He took his contact information, and it seemed like a peace offering. It was not meant as a manipulation pipeline. But as it tends to be with manipulators, they'll use whatever lines they have. Morris, it's your beard. Your mother and I think it's time you shave. Suddenly, my beard wasn't just a topic at home, but now my rabbi, in charge of approving my dating and answering calls as my primary reference for dating, and approving me for the classes I was taking, and allowing me to live with the subsidized rent I was having, who had the power at any moment he'd like to kick me out of the yeshiva, was now telling me that I needed to shave my beard. It didn't come with an overtly mentioned threat, but it didn't have to. And so I told him I'd shave, and to give me a month. I was switching units in the first week of February at work, and I used the excuse that I didn't want to shock my patients, and that when I get new patients, they'll just get to know me without a beard. It was somewhat true. It also, I needed some time, gave me time to process all this. It was a lot. I was fuming. Whew. And that first week of February was here. And boy, was a lot happening. I was still in communication with the girl from Baltimore. I was also coming towards a head with my dissertation. And after 2 years of research, we were almost ready to compute the data. And my defense date was around the corner. If I wanted a March in graduation on time in May, it needed to be submitted fully finished in 2 months. That would be by mid-April. And presented before May 3rd. Internship was rolling on too, 5 days a week, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., except of course for Fridays, where I had to race back against the clock to make it before sundown for the Sabbath. And did I mention the 2-hour commute each way? That's 4 hours a day. And nightly learning, and time for praying, and all the therapy. Did I say I was busy? On top of all this, the seeds of doubt I had in the religion itself were warming, not to a full boil yet, but certainly present. On top of everything, I was changing units. I would be ending therapy with all my patients. After 6 months of getting close with these people, with these human beings, and getting a whole, I was going to be leaving. It's one of the hardest parts of being in training. And I'd be getting a whole new supervisor and a whole new caseload. It's an emotional process, to say the least. And then I get the news that my mother's brother's wife's mother died at over 100 years old. That's my great-aunt-in-law, I guess. It wasn't sudden. She wasn't young. It was sad, as any death is. And with any Jewish event, there's a ceremony, the Shiva, which is a week-long process where the immediate family of the mourner sit on the floor in the house and accept visitors bringing condolences and support. It can be really sweet and helpful for mourners. But I didn't feel particularly close to the woman who passed away. I saw her at some Thanksgivings here and there. I, of course, knew my aunt, and who was her daughter and would be sitting Shiva, but the idea of driving to Brooklyn with everything I was doing, particularly the unit change, it felt like a lot. Look, I could have made time, took off from learning for a night to be there, but it wasn't about driving to Brooklyn or taking off learning. It was about walking into a minefield. This was my mother's side of the family, and there was no way I was walking out of there without someone stabbing me in the heart emotionally. My uncle had done it a few times, my grandmother, and of course, all the times my mother did it. And there was my aunt, who would have been in an emotionally fragile state. She was mourning. This had trap written all over it. I wasn't buying in, not this week. I didn't have time or space to get emotionally abused. And so I sent a text to my mom, or maybe it was a quick phone call. There's no good way to deliver bad news to an abuser. Mom, I don't think it's in the cards this week. I have a lot going on. Another one of those long letters from Mom followed about how this was family and I was abandoning my family. That Friday, my brother called for a half hour trying to convince me to come. Then my father right after him, same thing. Morris, you know how important this is to your mother. This was sickness, and I knew it. I finally learned enough in my psychology practice, my education, and just feeling it from other people, what validation and love actually felt like, to recognize that this wasn't it. This was emotional abuse, and I saw it clear. I pled my case to them. I even opened up about my fears of being abused, and they promised that they would protect me from the abuse. How could they protect me from people saying words? They can't stand in the way of them. And this isn't even physical. Hell, they couldn't even see it if they tried. Not yet, at least. I was just beginning to understand it. The only thing I knew for sure was that when someone said certain words, my heart would feel like a crater. It was brutal, extremely painful, physically and emotionally. So I sat there on Saturday night in debate. There was one morning left of the Shiva. I didn't know what to do. Go, and I abandoned myself. Don't go, and I risked losing my family connection. And then I remembered wise words from a close confidant I had shared these stories with. They asked me a question that would change my life forever. Why do you stay? No one ever asked me that before. Not even my therapist. Everyone else was trying to convince me I was overreacting. That I should come home and make nice. Why did I stay? I wanted a mother. I wanted to be a good son. But was this all worth it? And so I made a scary choice. I decided there was no winning. Not in these kind of binds. I looked at my life, and it wasn't easy, but I saw a path towards freedom. It was possible. I circled the calendar. I could graduate in August, and maybe this new relationship might work out. I could move to Baltimore. If not, perhaps Far Rockaway, year-round. Not that far, but far enough. Hell, maybe I can go to another state. There were Jewish communities around the world. Who knows? I would have a doctorate at that point, giving me much more financial leverage and mobility, and an opportunity to finally cut myself off from my family and free myself from my mother. Whew. But this was still February, not August. And I still needed the car to get to work and my credit card to pay for my things in my life. And I didn't want the stress of dealing with the blow up. So I decided I would end the relationship eventually, but fake it and run the motions as long as I could until I at least had a clear exit route. This was the end. I was finally done. I was finally ready to choose myself. Tune in to our next and final episode of Phase 2 and find out about if and how I made it out and how I got to where I'm at now. Thank you.